very special cemetery. We have about 41,000 people interned here, and as many of you know, I'm sure many of you, as me, have relatives here, some dating back quite a number of years, a long, long time, and we take a lot of pride here. This is one of our great events here. In December, we do Wreaths Across America here. We do that down in the Veterans section, and everyone is welcome to come during that time period and help lay wreaths out, and we lay out several hundreds of wreaths, and it makes it look beautiful and very nice. Obviously, you don't have weather like this in December, and sometimes it's rainy, and sometimes it's snowy, and sometimes it's a little bit everything. But it's a wonderful time down in here. So the format's changed just a little bit this year, and Howard Long with the Historical Society will explain it to you and kind of some of the reasons for that. But the stories will be just as good in a lot of ways, and we have some great people here that'll portray those. Some of them were characters, I guess I could use that word, and some of them were just, they were great citizens of the time, but they were so instrumental in the foundation of Newark in so many ways, and then sometimes surrounding from that a little bit. You know, Newark, there's a book in the library that's kind of in storage, but in 1910, the Newark Board of Trade existed, and there were over 600 members. And that's quite amazing to think of factories and industries to that magnitude in 1910. And so much of that history, because obviously we had the canal coming through here, and then later on trains, and a lot of freight came through this way, and goods, people come in from the countryside to get that. So that was really the history. When I talk around Ohio to different groups, I remind them this year we're 221 years old as a city, and that's really amazing. But what that tells you is how much history we have. And again, these people, I appreciate them all stepping up to play the roles today and kind of share some of that history with you. But most important, I thank all of you for being here. You know, this is the event this year, no charge. We've really worked through that, and I think it's the right thing. And please ask a neighbor or a friend to join you next year. How many people, by a show of hands, are first year ever to Echoes of Past? That's wonderful to see that. Thank you very much for sharing that piece with us. So we always want to know that and always want to build that. A lot of things going on the weekends around this town, but we're happy you're here with us tonight. So at this point, I'm going to hand the mic over to Howard Long, who is the director of the Lincoln County Historical Society. They do a wonderful job.
Did you say hysterical? Yeah, please have to throw that in, guys. You know, the beauty of the job is that you have to enjoy what you're doing. And every single day I go to work, and it's not work. I will speak up. I told everyone they had to talk to the top of the mic, and I'm not doing it, so there we go. Every day you have to go to work and you have to enjoy what you do. And my job, I get to help people go down rabbit holes all day long and research and share pictures and photos and help people document. It's just an absolute and amazing job. And then to have this type of an event, Echoes of the Past, to talk about the past and talk about the impact of people that have lived in Lincoln County and what a profound impact they've had on this community. Because like the mayor says, we're 221 years old. Lincoln County has an amazing history. Newark has an amazing history. And thank you all for coming out. Just a couple of things. So we decided there's no walking around. We're going to stay in one location the entire time. That was something that we had to kind of look at, and if we went to all the grave sites that we're presenting today, you guys would probably get 2 miles in. Okay, we don't want to do that. So I think going forward, we have a great location here. This is what we'd like to do, and we're going to probably just not do the grave walk, but give you the opportunity. We've given out, if you went to the historical tent over there, we did have a self-guided map. It has a list of all of our guests today and where their places are in Cedar Hill. You are welcome after to walk around, and you'll also find an Historical Society marker next to the gravesite. So if you're questioning where you're looking, look for the white and black sign. That tells you you're in the right spot. You all know we're in lot number 9. That's our location right now. Okay. Another thing that the board decided this past week was to not charge for this event. We want this to be a community event. We don't want a $5 charge to be a deterrent for anyone to come out and be part of this. We'll always ask for a donation, because if I don't ask for a donation, I'm not doing my job. So thank you all for being here. We have 10 presenters. Actually, we're presenting 10, but you'll see that Doug Stout is doing 4. And this morning we decided to space him out a little bit so he wasn't back to back. Thank you. You're welcome. So what you're saying is you can only take so much of Doug. So, the committee. Raise your hand and look around. If you were on the committee this year in the planning, Chance in the back there, wave. We had an amazing committee this year. We start this process in March. We have been meeting monthly since March, determining what the theme will be, determining who we want to present. And I had someone not too long ago ask me, why are you honoring African American heritage? No agenda. It's something that's never been done in this cemetery, and I feel it was something that needed to be done. That was it. Nothing more, nothing less. And we have some great people you're going to hear about tonight. And we'll start off. We're going to have Mike Noble up to present his father, Reverend Charles Noble. Mike.
Thank you, Howard. Let me just say it's an honor and a privilege to be here, and it's also heartwarming to see so many of you come out today. Howard had called me, and I think, first of all, let me just say that a wonderful job with putting this together and honoring the contributions of African Americans here who Newark is our home. And this is where I grew up, and so many of us where we were shaped, and our identities are tied to this wonderful city. Also to the mayor, it's good to see you today as always, and all of our presenters. He told me that I would be first, and I said, well, how long would you like me to talk? He said, well, you know, as a preacher, you can talk as long as you want to. I didn't tell him, but I thought to myself, wrong answer. Of course, I could talk all day and all night about the Reverend Charles W. Noble Sr. because he was my father. I want to just give a few reflections, and I want to give room for the rest of the presenters, so I will be disciplined about this and just share some highlights of Dad as I knew him, and then I'll conclude with probably the Reverend Noble that most of you knew. One of the things that used to drive my father, and he would tell me this growing up, that he said that he wanted to leave the world a better place than when he found it. He would repeatedly say that over and over again. That he was driven to be the best that he could be, but he saw that not necessarily from a vantage point of trying to become the king of the castle, so to speak. But my father lived the life, and he preached the same message to us kids, which, by the way, we heard a sermon every day. I had no idea that all of that would make me turn out to be a preacher, but it is what it is. But he would say that life is all about stewardship. Taking what you have, doing your best with it, but not just selfishly for yourself, but to improve life for others. So when we moved here in the late 60s, 1967, I was only 6 years old. We came to a different community in Columbus. We moved here from Columbus. And he immediately began to working in the community. We didn't see Dad a whole lot in the sense of he was always out busy doing some things, but he always spent time and invested in us as children. My father took his role as a dad extremely seriously. And I want to just say that I want to thank God in the presence of all of you that Reverend C.W. Noble was my father, because he taught me what it meant to be not just a man, but a good person. I watched him from when I was 6 and growing up. Dad had rhymes and reasons for just about everything. He was always teaching you something. Preaching a sermon is really what it was. He would say things like, any job worth doing is worth doing right. Whether a job be large or small, do it well or not at all. And so I was 6 and he took me and my brother out on a job with him, and he was doing some construction. He handed me an axe and he handed my brother an axe. I was 6 and my brother was 11, I want to think, at the time. And I believed him. You know, I was going to do my best job. I took the axe and he told me and my brother to take the axe to the root of this tree. Of course, now I look at it, he was just preoccupying our time. But I didn't know that, so I'm just chopping away. I almost cut my brother's finger off. Next thing you know, my dad has to come out there and he asked me, Michael, what are you doing? And I looked at him and I said, well, Dad, you told me if any job is worth doing, it's worth doing right. Whether it be large or small, do it well or not at all. And then he looked at me and he just said, good job, son. The point that I'm really making is that my earliest memories about my father is setting a standard where he always tried to inspire me to do my best. If it wasn't good enough, then at least I would have peace of mind and my conscience would be clear that I put forth the effort. He would say things like quitters never win and winners never quit, and I could go on and on and on. But the point is, he was my father, and I love my father. It's been about a year since he's passed, and he would say something that I would never forget. He always talked about his legacy, and he says, you cannot measure a tree until it's cut down. You can't measure a tree until it's cut down. Well, he's lived. The Lord has taken him home. And as I was preparing for this, my mind went to all the things that my father was able to do sacrificially to try to make life better for other people. He left his job. My father was a construction, he wasn't a worker, he had his own business. And it was quite successful. But he was moved that God was calling him to commit himself to a higher calling. Not just to make money or to look out for his family, but to do something that would help others. And he felt it was God's calling and passion on his life. So he explained to us as we came that he would be doing things and sacrificing, and that we had to hold up a standard in the community because he was trying to make things better. He first of all built a new church, a new congregation for the membership. But many of you probably know him best for his housing accomplishments. What he did is he took his construction background and he made it work. He told me the story about why he ever got involved in building public housing, and the story goes like this. There was a woman who was a member of the congregation, and one day he saw her going out, and in those days they used to have to get coal. And they would bring the coal into the house and they would use the coal to warm up the house. And he saw her carrying some pails. She had 2 pails, and she had them full of coal, and she was going from the back. Back then she would get it from the train tracks that was right behind, the church building. And he asked her, he says, let me help you with that. He says, you're a senior woman and you shouldn't. She was struggling with it, and she didn't want to let him help her. He insisted. He got to the house, and it was a 1-room house. And the lady had 6 children. When he brought the coal into the house, he saw that there was a hole in the floor. 6 kids. She was raising them all on her own. And she had a hole in the floor where they would defecate. No bathroom, no running water. And he put the coal in the corner, and she was so embarrassed. He said she had tatters on her apron. She was wearing an apron. And he said that he knew that because they used that to relieve themselves, that the rats would come and eat away their apron. He said it broke his heart. And he knew from that moment on that he had to do something to elevate the standard of living for people who could not help themselves. He went about trying to find ways that he could have a largest impact. During those times, that's when monies was being funneled in the early 70s through HUD. Public assisted housing was made available through 202 grants and things from the government where you could build projects. The government would subsidize some of their income. The idea was not to give a handout, but a hand up, to create an environment where people could have dignity, where they could live with self-respect, where children wouldn't have to be raised in that kind of squalor. She wasn't a bad woman. She was a good woman. She was a faithful mother. She just needed help, and that was his motivation. 59 properties were built all around the United States, 29 in Licking County, and many that are across this country. Through his efforts, there was about 70% of the subsidized housing in our entire county came as a result of his efforts. He kept rolling, and once he did one, he would do another and another and another. And many people, which is interesting because in those days, the East End was primarily, predominantly African American. It wasn't a mixed community. And for the first time, we began to see that the real difference is not necessarily between our colors or different religions, but most people, they just want an opportunity. They want an opportunity to live the best life that they can, to provide for their families, to raise their children, to really be sacrificial and make sure that the next generation has it better than they had it. That's what we experienced. Many summers I would work his projects, in his projects, and he would work me like a mule, because I think he just wanted to show everybody he wasn't showing favoritism. But I learned a lot. He would never allow anyone to give us special privileges. He always would tell us that you need to do your best and you need to blaze your trail, but you also need to bring somebody else up with you. And I want to thank God for my father, because what he established as a legacy is an example of what it means to live a life where you commit yourselves to the service and betterment of others. You see, as a preacher, and anybody who would know him and you run into him, first of all, you know you're going to get a sermon. Amen? People would see my dad coming and they would run in the other direction. Sometimes he'd tell me, go get him, man, go get him. But you never had to worry about where he stood. You never had to worry about what he was about. You had no questions about the kind of person that he was and what he thought was most important. He would always talk to you about God. He would always talk to you about, how you're living your life. But he also would always challenge everyone to make life better for someone else. Our home, when we grew up, it was always open, and pretty much we'd have family meals. And those days before TV dinners and the internet, we would all eat, around the table. Now it was family time. I thought that I had brothers and sisters that he hadn't told us about, because there was always somebody else there. But that's just the way that he was. And my mother was right there, knock and step with him. He never saw anybody that he didn't care about and would try to inspire them. I can't tell you how many people who did not have the blessing or privilege of sometimes familial or family support. Sometimes individuals didn't have fathers in their homes, and sometimes their mothers wouldn't be there. My father would just say, come on, we'll take you on. He's offered to raise other people's kids and things of that nature. That's who he was. He didn't do it for aggrandizement. He didn't do it because of ego. He did it because that's really the kind of man that he felt he needed to be. And I'm grateful for that. Back in those days, things were a little bit different with regards to race relations, and growing up, we ran into a lot of prejudice and things of that nature. But my father didn't teach us to be bitter. He didn't teach us to go out and try to be destructive and make our voices known, just shouting as loud as we could. What he really said is, he says, you set an example. He says, the value of a person is in the character that they have and who you are.
he would teach us that it's not what people say you are, but it's who you are in terms of your values and who you are. And he gave me stability, and I'm gonna tell you that was very important, because what he taught us is that he didn't want us to spend our time reacting to other individuals, but to find our path and to commit ourselves to helping others, even those who didn't think that we were equals. That was the world we lived in. And I watched it slowly by individuals, each person that he would help, or each person that he would inspire. Sooner or later, I watched people who didn't really think much of my father, who didn't really see him as a peer, who didn't think he really was significant, or he didn't have really a place at the table. He just kept working. He just kept laboring. He used to always say that a man's gifts will make room for him, and he included, women as well. He wasn't being chauvinistic. And what he was really saying is that life is always going to bring obstacles. There's always going to be things and hurdles that we had to overcome. But each one of us has to decide, he would say, how we will respond to it. We can give in to it, and we can become self-destructive, trying to let everybody else know that we're significant and we matter. Or you can be secure enough in yourself and say, this is who I am and this is what I can contribute. Because I do believe that I do, like my father, want to live a life so that I can make it better than it was when I found it. And I think my father did that, and I think your presence today is a testimony to that. My father did a lot of other things, and I don't really think that this is so much about what he accomplished or what he did. I think it really is about the legacy. He was driven by legacy. What would people say about him? Not necessarily in terms of rumors or things of that nature, but what could they point to say that C.W. Noble, Charles Whitney Noble Sr., had been this way? I don't think it's really the housing that's the greatest legacy. I don't think all the accolades and all the recognitions that he did accomplish really speak to who he was. I think the best example of who my father is and the legacy that he left is how he touched so many people with just a generous hand and a strong back, where he worked to make life better for someone else. And so, as we stand here honoring our African American heritage, I kind of really see it as not just African American heritage when it comes to my father, because he didn't see color that way. It really is about a heritage of a community, a heritage of a society, a heritage of just people who would use their gifts and their talents and their abilities to make life better for someone else. If my father could hear me, and I know you may hear that, sometimes I know he's looking down. To be honest with you, I know he's with Jesus, and I'm sure because he's with Jesus, he's not thinking about what I'm doing right now. But I do want to thank him, and I want to do it publicly. This is the first opportunity that I've had in this kind of setting to thank God for my father, because as I've gone in the breadth of the country and done different things, I do notice a difference when people don't have a strong home base where you get your value and your worth and your principles. I see a difference. I see a difference in so many absentee fathers from homes and so many broken families and children that don't seem to have parents that care enough to find out, who you're talking to and who you're hanging with. I didn't grow up in the internet age. We grew up where you had one rotary phone. It was in the kitchen. And when the phone would ring, they would pick it up, and there was no such thing as privacy. He'd say, if you want privacy, move out and get a job. Right? And I didn't like it, but as all kids did. But now I really appreciate it, because I know I would have turned out very, very different if my father did not take an active role in the raising of his children and me being his youngest son. So this is a privilege for me. This is an honor for me. I thank the people of Shiloh for understanding and supporting him for 43 years as the pastor of the church. I think the city of Newark, he was very close, Mayor Hall, with Mayor Baker. They were very good friends, and The city has supported him in his efforts. He couldn't have done that by himself. He had to get senators, he had to get congressmen, he had to get people to support him, because you can't do housing, public housing, unless you have political support. And they have to write letters of support. So I want to thank all of them who, many of them are already gone, but they contributed to the successes that have made the community so much better. I also would like to just give a thanks to you, to Howard Long and the Licking County Historical Society for taking this moment and asking me to come and just give a few remarks about my father. He was a builder, he was a visionary, he was a leader, he was a decent man, he was many, many things, but to me, he's the best father that I ever could have had, and I'm grateful for that. And thank you for coming and honoring him today. See? I'm done. Thank you again.
Mike, thank you for sharing your father. And I can say that our first telephone was a party line, so there was no privacy. The whole neighborhood knew. That was back in the, I guess that was back in the 60s, long time ago. Yes. Now I'm going to have Doug Stout come up and present Sam Weaver. Doug.
Samuel Gustavus Weaver was born in Reedsville, Ohio on February 9th in 1890. His family moved to Newark sometime between the 1900 and 1910 census. He moved here with his father, Samuel, his mom, Mary, and his sister, Mabel. In the 1910 census, he was 20 years old. He was working as a laborer in a glass house. He played baseball with the all-black semi-pro baseball team, the Newark Grays. When World War I began in April of 1917, he had to register for the draft on June 5th. This was a national draft. The Army was segregated, and along with the Army, the draft cards were segregated. He couldn't help but notice when he registered for the draft, in the bottom left-hand corner, it said, if this person is of African-American descent, rip off the corner. He was living at 199.5 Central Avenue when he enlisted on July 14, 1917. He was with Company B of the 9th Infantry Regiment of the Ohio National Guard. He was sent for training to Camp Sheridan in Montgomery, Alabama. Something the Advocate did at the time was they started a project where they would strike a medal for every soldier and sailor and Marine that was serving in World War I from Licking County. It would say Licking County, Ohio on the front, and the year, and put the soldier, sailor, and Marine's name on the back of it. They made sure they sent one to Samuel, and he wrote a letter home to the Advocate when he got it. His letter was published November 30th of 1917, and he wrote to the editor of the Advocate, "The medal recently received is greatly appreciated. It is very encouraging to the boys in camp training to know that the people of Newark and Licking County appreciate their services to such an extent. I find the Army quite different from civil life, but nevertheless I'm compelled to believe it is a healthy one. There is nothing like as much sickness as one might imagine among so many men. The boys have all been introduced to digging ditches, trenches, grading company streets, chopping wood, and other work to harden them up. So consequently, they are in fairly good shape. We have 1 hour of setting up exercise every morning before drill. That, along with learning how to use the rifle skillfully so as to capture our opponent, certainly develops every muscle of the body to a great extent. The climate here in the South is somewhat different from the climate up north. The evenings and mornings are very cool. In fact, cool enough for overcoats, and the air at night is very heavy and damp. One has to be a little careful to prevent taking cold, but with a little common sense that can easily be prevented. From the way I can understand it, the winters are not severe here at all. It may get a little cold in December and January, but with the exception of a few long, cool rains, the weather is very agreeable. Although soldier life is rather rough, it certainly is agreeing with me. I never felt better in my life, and I'm gaining weight right along. I am down here roughing it with the rest of the boys, and when we go to the front, we are going with a strong willpower of bringing back what we went after. Give my regards to all at home. With many thanks for the medal, I remain yours for the Stars and the Stripes, Sam G. Weaver. Sam was sent overseas in March of 1918. He served with the Headquarters Company, 372nd Division Infantry of the 93rd Division. He was musically inclined, so he was sent with the band, but that doesn't mean he got out of the fighting. One thing the black troops learned when they went to France was they would not be fighting with Americans or British troops. General Blackjack Pershing thought that the French, having more colonies, were more used to handling what he called the black soldier. So they fought with the French. As a result, he was with the French Army, assigned to the 157th French Division, which was nicknamed the Red Hand because of the red hand that appeared on their unit flag. They fought in the Champagne-Marne region in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Since the unit fought with the French, its military decorations are French rather than American. On October 8, 1918, French General Courbet of the 157th Division, who fought with the 93rd, issued the following. He wrote, "In transmitting to you with legitimate pride the thanks and congratulations of the General, allow me, my dear friends of all ranks, Americans and French, to thank you from the bottom of my heart as a chief and a soldier for the expression of gratitude for the glory which you have lent our good 157th Division. I had full confidence in you, but you have surpassed my hopes. During these 9 days of hard fighting, you have progressed 9 kilometers through powerful organized defenses, taken nearly 600 prisoners, 15 guns of different calibers, 20 minor mortars, and nearly 150 machine guns, secured an enormous amount of engineering material, an important supply of artillery, ammunition, brought down by your fire, 3 enemy airplanes. The Red Hand, sign of the division, thanks to you, became a bloody hand which took the Germans by the throat and made him cry for mercy. You have well avenged our glorious dead." While Samuel was overseas, his father died. He was 72 years old in September. But Samuel didn't learn of it until he heard it from a comrade. The letters from his family hadn't gotten through to him. A letter in the paper, or article in the paper, wrote that Band Corporal Samuel Weaver has recently learned of his father's death here through a letter received by a comrade. Letters from his relatives telling of the death had failed to reach him, according to a letter received by his sister, Miss Nora Guy, 260 Eddy Street. He said, "We have been in quite a mix-up." Weaver's letter said, and the statement is followed by a series of perforations in the letter, giving it a lace curtain effect, which was the censor's artistic method of culminating objectionable material. "It seems as though everything is pretty much our way," Weaver continues. "I think a few more months will fix everything up all right. I am getting along fine with my music. Someday I may be a musician." Well, World War I ended on November 11th, 1918. By December 6th, they printed that letter on Samuel. He returned home from overseas in February of 1919. He moved to Detroit by the 1920 census. But when he returned, he gave a speech at the Newark AME Church where he talked about his service. On January 4th, 1936, he went into the Highland Park General Hospital in Detroit. He died 26 days later on January 30th, 1936, of lobar pneumonia. He was only 45 years old. His death certificate states that he was working as a valet at the time. He left behind a wife and a son, Samuel Juder. His body was returned to Newark on February 4th and taken to the home of his sister, Mrs. Ora Guy. The funeral was 2 o'clock that afternoon at Trinity AME Church. He was buried here at Cedar Hill Cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. This is prime real estate. I'm now going to have Rebecca Black come up to present Jackson Shackelford. Rebecca.
great to be here. I thank everyone for coming. My name is Rebecca Shackelford Black. My great-grandfather was Jackson Shackelford, and he lived here in Newark, Ohio. He was born in slavery, and on your program it says his date of birth is unknown. You can put 1816. He was born in 1816.
Thank you.
And I also need to tell you how he came to Newark, but that involves a famous racehorse named Gray Eagle. Gray Eagle was born in 1835 in Kentucky, and that's where my great-grandfather's from. Gray Eagle was a light gray horse with a silver mane, absolutely gorgeous. And actually, when he was sold by his owner, the person who bought him paid $600 for him. But within 3 years of him running races, and when he was sold for over $6,500. Now, that was like back, he was like a 3-year-old. Okay, and then he won a lot of races, and excuse me, and he was so beautiful and stately, and he became the standard for thoroughbred horses to this day. There was another horse named Wagner, and Great Eagle ran against him, came in second. But then the next time they met, Gray Eagle won. And then third time they met, Gray Eagle came up lame. But then he was used for a stud, for breeding. And one of his offsprings was Traveler. And Traveler was the horse of General Robert E. Lee, the Confederate soldier. There were many other well-known offsprings of Gray Eagle. And then eventually a gentleman from Newark, Ohio purchased Gray Eagle. The owner had a slave who was the groomer of Gray Eagle and had been. Gray Eagle died here in Newark, Ohio, July 3rd, 1863. So for 20 years, Jackson Shackelford was that groomer of Gray Eagle. Okay. So the stipulation of Jackson's, the slave owner, was that you buy the horse, you buy the groom, because there was that tight connection with him. And so he did that, and that's how Jackson Shackelford came to Newark, Ohio in about 1856. And there is a street, for those of you who know Newark, there's a street that runs between 11th and 13th called Merchant. And that gentleman is the one that bought Gray Eagle. And so Jackson cared for that horse here, and eventually he himself bought it, but he felt obligated to pay Mr. Merchant for having bought him. He bought him for $900, and Jackson Shackelford repaid that to him. And then when Mr. Merchant died, he stayed on, but also when he was working before for the slave owner in Kentucky, that slave owner was a kindly man. He allowed Jackson to drive a stagecoach from Kentucky to Cincinnati to Newark, Ohio. And he let him keep the money. He also let him work for other people and earn money and keep that money. And in doing that, Jackson accumulated enough money to also, once he was free and repaid his debt, he bought Jane Woodford, who would later become his wife. she was born in 1833. So he was quite a bit older than her, and it was more like a father-daughter relationship because he sent to have her educated as well. And although he had been born in slavery and was not educated, but God gives us a lot of common sense, and he used it. And when he was, once he was free, he used what God gave him, and he became, quite wealthy and well known. For those of you who know where Hoover Street is, my great-grandfather, they owned property from Hoover Street to Granville Street to King Avenue. Yeah. And so then Jackson Shackelford was very concerned about the education of children. He loved children. He and Jane never had children, but he and other men of African American descent, they wanted to build a school for children to attend, and so they did. They built one. Through the nights, some people who were determined that the black children would not have a school tore it down. But the men were determined, and they rebuilt it. And my great-grandfather, Jackson Shackelford, stood guard with a gun, walking the streets. He was ready to give his life to keep them from tearing down that school or damaging it again. And so the school was built, and the children attended, did not receive any funds from the city. So it was by subscription. They used, so anybody could give some money to help for the children to go to school, to help with the expenses. And they had teachers. Books were like any books that had animals in it or, anything, including Bibles. And Jackson was a very, very religious man, and he loved God, and he put, Jesus said that, whosoever giveth a glass of water cold water to someone, or visits someone in prison, or helps the widows and the orphans, you've done it unto me. And I think that was Jackson's philosophy, because a little 10-year-old boy showed up in Newark, Ohio, that had been in slavery, born in 1860 in Kentucky. He showed up somehow or another here in Newark, Ohio. And don't know exactly how, but he wound up staying with Jackson and his wife and Jane. And in the 1870 census, he's listed the name. His last name was Rohne, R-H-O-N-E, and the first name Samuel, age 10. He was listed as a boarder. But then in the 1880 census, by then Jackson had died. He died in March, which was just before the census was done. And at that time, Samuel Rohne was listed as Samuel R. Shackelford, foster son. And he lived with Jane Woodford until actually he married many years later. And Jane was a wonderful cook, and so she was a well-known caterer, and those that in Newark area that had elaborate parties, Jane was the customary person that was hired. And any of you that know or have heard of Judge Samuel Hunter or Judge Robbins Hunter, Robbins Hunter wrote a book called The Judge Rode a Sorrel Horse, which Howard Long so kindly let me borrow because somebody else had told me about it, and they were descendants of both of those gentlemen. And by golly, and there it was. It said that she was customarily the one that they hired for these elaborate parties, and they were fascinated with her ability to handle all the waiters and just every detail of every elaborate party, including when Robin Hunter's sister got married in 1911. And so Jane catered many things. Newark. Samuel, the foster son, went on to marry the daughter of a Reverend J.W. Gazaway, an AME minister. Her name was Lucy, and she was my father's mother. Samuel, his dad. So they had 8 children, and my dad was one of those 8 children. And so my mother and dad, my dad married, he was named Samuel also, Samuel Roan, and he married Geneva White. And then I'm number 8 of 13 children. I thought it was number 7, but my older sisters corrected me when they went anytime going down memory lane, because I was unaware that mom had a stillborn. Mom and dad had a stillborn in 1935. So that put me to number 8 and 13 instead of 12 children. But anyway, so there are lots of descendants, and it's all due to Jackson Shackelford and having the compassion and love for a 10-year-old boy, an orphan boy. And I'm very grateful for the information that my deceased brother Herb Shackelford provided, and also my sister Esther Shackelford Thompson, for cousin Michelle, who was the granddaughter of Martha Shackelford, who was one of my dad's siblings. And I thank Licking County Library, the Historical Society, and another shout out to my sister Brenda Green. She's a historian, and she's given me a lot of information. And so I am here because of Jackson Shackelford, and there are doctors and lawyers and many nurses, many ministers, you name it, and they were all encouraged to do their very best. Do it right the first time. You never have to do it over. But I am so very thankful for everyone to be out. There's a lot more information that I could give you. One tidbit that I just found out in this past week is that although I am not biologically related to Jackson, my children are, because Jane Woodford had a sister named Harriet Woodford. Harriet Woodford was married to a Moses Black, who was my husband's great-grandfather. And one of Moses and Harriet's sons, a Kenneth Lee Black, excuse me, he was, there's probate records I found out from a newspaper article where he had applied to be the administrator of his uncle, Elijah Woodford, because Elijah Woodford was the brother of Harriet and Jane. So this is just in the past week or so, I found all this information out, and I had Allison at the cemetery office print some information out for me, and it's in the same place where Jackson is buried. Jane Shackelford is there. Also, Jane's mother, Harriet Woodford, is there. And I just found that out just Thursday after our meeting. So I've got the information. I need to go and find her over there, but in that same section. So it's been quite a ride, and it's mind-blowing. The other thing was, I don't know if I mentioned or not, but my cousin in Florida, she told me night before last. He said, well, you know, or 2 nights ago. She said, well, you know, Jackson Shackelford's first name was Andrew. I said, what? And she said, yes, on his, when he bought the section in section 7, it's signed Andrew Jackson Shackelford. So I'm going down this rabbit hole, and I don't know what I'm going to find. I might find that he's related to a Tom Shackelford who was on the at Monticello, because on my mother's side of the family, I'm part of the Hemmings President Jefferson relationship. So I don't know. We'll see. I'll keep you abreast. But thank you all for being here. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you, Rebecca. The return of Doug. Doug will be presenting Orrin Henry.
Orrin Henry was born in Newark on April 8, 1848. He was the son of William and Elizabeth. His father was a barber here in Newark. And when the Civil War began in April of 1861, African Americans weren't permitted to enlist. However, after the Emancipation Proclamation in January of 1863, blacks were permitted to enlist in segregated units. We know of 44 African Americans from Licking County who enlisted. Orrin and his brother Charles were part of that number who enlisted, but they were in different units. Orrin was 18 years old when he enlisted on February 27, 1863, with Company E of the 27th United States Colored Troops in Delaware, Ohio. According to his enlistment record, he was 5 feet 5 inches tall. They first were sent to Virginia, where they guarded supply trains in May and June. They were then sent to the siege of Petersburg, Virginia. The Federal troops had surrounded Petersburg, been trying to starve the Confederates out. Somebody had the idea to build a tunnel under the Confederate lines and blow it up. When they would blow it up, they decided to then send troops in. General Burnside was in charge. It was decided that the black troops would be the troops that would lead the charge. They were trained to go not into the explosion site, but to march around it, to charge in around it. At the last minute, General Grant decided that it may be too dangerous to send the black troops in first, so they sent the white troops in who weren't ready for the battle. The white troops, when the explosion happened, you can guess the chaos, the amount of dirt and the sound. The white troops ran straight into what they later called the crater. At that point, the Confederates rallied faster than anybody thought. They started shooting down on the troops. It was not well planned, let's put it that way. At that point, the 27th United States Colored Troops were ordered in with Orrin Henry. They went into this. What you have to understand is the Confederate soldier did not, for the most part, recognize the black troops as soldiers. They had said that any black soldier, any in the uniform, if they were captured, they would either be shot or sold into slavery. They were not going to be treated as a POW. That's what happened in the crater. When they surrounded these men, many of them eyewitness accounts were the soldier would surrender and they would be executed. That was what Orrin Henry survived that day. He went on to fight at the Battle of Hatcher's Run near Petersburg on October 27, 1864. At Hatcher's Run, he was wounded. We don't know the extent of his wound. We know he spent some time in the hospital, but he was present for duty in November and December. He went on to participate at the battles of Fort Fisher, North Carolina in December and January. If you've ever seen the movie Glory, that's Fort Fisher. He then participated in the Carolina campaign with General William Tecumseh Sherman. On April 11, 1865, General Joe Johnston surrendered to Sherman and the Civil War was over. He was discharged September 21, 1865, and he returned to Newark, where he began a career as a barber also, just like his dad. Sometime after the war, he applied for a disability pension. We don't know whether the pension was because of his wound or some other war-related disease, but he was granted his pension on March 21, 1880. However, just a couple months later, in June of 1880, at the age of 32 years old, Warren Henry passed away at his parents' house at 88 Elm Street, being one of our 44 African Americans that served in the Civil War.
Thank you, Doug. Next, we are going to have Jerry Good, who is going to present Harriet Pierce Green and Daniel Webster Green.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I think this is about my great-grandparents, the Greens, and I think this caught Howard's attention when I mentioned they were connected to the Webb House here in Newark. They worked for the Webbs in the house next to the Webb Museum, and thanks to Howard recently, I was able to tour that house, which was kind of a good feeling to be in the house where they actually walked. I've always been interested in how the Greens happened to settle in Newark, and I've pieced together some family history from Mom's notes, my memory of stories told to us, my cousin Darcy in California, who's done a lot of research, Doug Stout, and an unexpected treasure trove of information from Kathy Dickerson Traeger here in Newark. She happened to do some research on my family and gave me a lot of history. My great-grandfather was Daniel Webster Green, born in 1862 in South Carolina. We don't know if he had any siblings. We've never heard. My great-grandmother was Henrietta Philomena Pierce, born in 1858 in Florence, Alabama. She and her sister Mary arrived in Cincinnati by boat. She had at least one more sister and a few brothers from stories I've heard, all living in Cincinnati. Her sister Mary married a man named Henry Burden from Nebraska. He came to Cincinnati after losing his first wife, and I think she was pretty much a mail order bride, because he didn't know her. He just came looking for a wife. That family were the first black homesteaders in Nebraska, and their home is now a museum outside of Lincoln, Nebraska. Henry Burden was a slave and forced to serve with the Confederate Army, but one night he and a group of about 200 slaves escaped, and they were captured by the Union soldiers. They asked to serve with the Union Army. They had several children, and one Mary. A lot of people were named after their mothers or fathers. I met her in Los Angeles, and there is a book about their family life in Nebraska. Another sister was Allie Pierce McCracken Clark, and I remember the McCracken family from Cincinnati, and I met their, son or grandson, Tom. And Tom McCracken, for a while, was a scout for the Harlem Globetrotters, so that was kind of cool. Grandpa Green was raised by a white professor, Llewellyn Evans, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. He taught at the University of Cincinnati, and we knew that because there was a photo that was always in our family of this professor. It was a professional photo, and it said he was a professor at University of Cincinnati. The picture was taken in Walnut Hills. Grandpa Green was listed as 18 years old in the 1880 census at the Evans family home in Cincinnati. He's listed as a mulatto or mixed race. He's also listed as a servant on that census, but he never said he worked for them. He always said that was who raised him. Professor Evans was a minister as well as a professor, and he taught theology at the University of Cincinnati. I found out through some online research he was very well known. His sermons were very popular, and after his death, a book was published. His family was from Wales, this Evans family. His father, Edward Evans, was a minister right here in Newark. They lived at 120 Mount Vernon Road, next to the mayor of Newark at that time, Gibson Atherton. And the home was likely taken by the 16 highway. I searched and located Edward Evans, the minister at Second Presbyterian Church. He was listed in their church history. And that, to me, answered the question of how Grandpa Green got to Newark. It was through that connection. And the minister and his wife are buried right here at Cedar Hill. And an interesting side note, at the time at the church was also a minister named Beecher, who was Harriet Beecher Stowe's brother. She was the writer of Uncle Tom's Cabin, among other things. There is no 1890 census, so we don't know where he lived at that point, but I think he was in Newark by then. And the Green family was listed in Newark in the 1900 census. They met at the Webb House and married on January 1st, 1885. And Daniel came first, and then later Henrietta, to work inside the house. They had 4 children. Carl, born in 1890. Ruth, my grandmother, born in 1894. Deborah, born in 1896, and Ethel in 1898. They would house sit for the Webbs when the Webbs traveled to Europe. I have a picture, but it's not that easy to show the picture. It's not large. I have some other pictures if you want to see them later. There is one picture that has my grandmother Ruth, her mother, my great-grandmother, and Deborah, her sister, and then a little girl on the lap, and that's Deborah, who some of you may know, Deborah Kalisle, who worked in Newark at Burdick's and also for the city of Newark. Carl, her son, served in World War I alongside Sam Weaver, who was mentioned here. And Carl was also in the Negro League baseball team in Newark. The plaque with the team's photo is now at Edwards Field, thanks to the Licking County NAACP. He didn't have children. And then the youngest, Ethel, died from appendicitis in her early 20s, and she had no children. And Ruth had 7 children. Ruth is my grandmother. She had 7 children: Carl, Benny, Henrietta, my mother, Mamie, Ruth, Frankie, and Edna Robertson. Deborah, her sister, had 3 children: Deborah, Mary, and Alice Kalisle. And the Webbs purchased the home that I grew up in and that we owned from about 1889. They purchased that house for my great-grandparents. And it was at 26 Brennan Street, right near the high school. We have, my sister had a photo of that house made into a puzzle. The home is no longer there, it was torn down. Let's see, I had some pictures I was going to show you, but that won't happen. Grandma Green died in 1929, and on her death certificate it says she had lived in Newark for 43 years. I have her obituary. Sometimes the dates and the ages are wrong in some of the records, even names, some of them. So the obituary says, Mrs. Henrietta Green, 63, colored, was found dead in bed this morning in her home, 26 Brennan Street. Mrs. Green had been ailing and was under the care of a physician. Her husband, Daniel Green, 1 son, Carl, and 2 daughters, Mrs. John Kalisle and Mrs. Ben Robinson of Newark, and 1 sister, Mrs. Allie Clark of Cincinnati, survived. Funeral services will be held Saturday afternoon, 1:30 o'clock, at the AME Church. Reverend J.A. Collins will officiate, and burial will be made at Cedar Hill Cemetery. Grandpa Green died in 1931. His death certificate said he lived in Newark for 45 years. We don't have an obituary for him. That is my little history of my family.
Thank you, Jerry. We have Tom Ash. Tom is going to present Dr. A.S. Burton.
Dr. Andrew Burton, MD. I'm going to share with you, thank you. Normally my mouth is so big I don't need that. At least George Coombs used to tell me that all the time. I'm going to share with you about this amazing individual. I view him as a gentleman and a scholar. I'm going to share with you some information, like his education and years of service and the services and so forth. Then I'm going to read a story. There was a story after I think he passed by a friend, and it just sums him up. So, starting out, Dr. Burton was born in Jamaica. I don't know how he ended up in Newark, Ohio. I didn't get that far into my research, but hot and cold. That's all I got for you. He came to Licking County in 1932. He was the first black physician in Licking County, ever. An amazing man. His education was, he did his, he went to Howard University, for the pre-med, and then he went to Meharry Medical College. So he traveled. He didn't stay in one spot, which speaks volumes about him as a person and what he brought to this community. His late wife, her name was Arizona Burton. He worked for Licking Memorial Hospital for 38 years. 38 years. That's a long, successful career in anything you do. And, that just speaks volumes about him. Now, he not only worked hard, but he served on the advisory board for the Salvation Army. So he was a man that, was very involved in his profession, but he loved Newark, Ohio. He was very active. I was reading this article and found it interesting that in his spare time, he loved roses. That's good. I'm not a flower guy, but I commend him. He created and cared for the Rose Garden at Licking Memorial Hospital and at the courthouse. He did both. He in his spare time wanted to do more for the community, and he wanted people to see, the beauty of roses. And since he worked at the hospital, he thought that was the best place for him to show his skills outside of being a very successful, medical doctor. He, through everything that I read, he always spoke about his family, and he always spoke about Newark, Ohio. He said he loved Newark, Ohio. He loved the people. I think it's safe to say that he had a very successful career. When I say gentleman and a scholar, who would give that much of their time? You think about that, being a doctor for all those years. You just want to get out and you want to just rest. He had this, thing where he wanted to make Newark a greater place for himself, for his family, and for everyone who lived here. Miss Rebecca shared with me that she came into the world. He brought her into the world. So he had to be a heck of a guy right there. He had to be an amazing man right there. This beautiful woman. And your mom worked for him? So, okay, so see, he's still living through us all. I want to read something, and I read this about him, and I just, I just thought, I was like, man, this is an amazing person. If I ever grow up, I truly want to be like this man. Seriously, if I ever grow up, this guy is going to be one of my role models. I'm going to share. This is a story written by a friend. It says, I would like to tell you about a man whose magic has helped and touched many to a better enjoyment of life. That's a strong statement. That's what we should all be doing, I believe. It says Dr. Burton was not only one of the best physicians in Newark, but he was an extraordinary man. He visited my farm, spare time. He visited my farm many times and would always bring me some little gifts. The doctor helped me drop vegetable seeds, and he would help him, once they were, finished, he would help him, gather them, so they could feed the family. not only his family but friends' families. I think that's amazing too. This person said he loved and honored this doctor so much that he took a picture with him and put it on his mantle at his house next to his family photos. And he wasn't a family member. He just loved and cared for him so much, and he meant so much because he was always there with his family. He was always giving, and he was probably the most upbeat person he said he ever knew. He said that when his wife got sick, the doctor would come over and take care of her for free because he said that they were friends, and that's what he was supposed to do. But when he got sick, he didn't want anyone to help him out. He's one of those people that, do as I say, not as I do. Which, that's what a person who's engaged and loving and caring does. Moms do that a lot too. The final line that he wrote really spoke everything about this person. He said, "The doctor was an outstanding man in any way you look at him. There are very few men in this community who have done as much to help the people live a better life." If we all leave this earth and someone can make that statement about us, we've lived an excellent life. I want to thank the mayor. I want to thank Howard. I want to thank you, Chance, and your staff for hooking everything up. It looks amazing, and I appreciate everyone. This is a Friday night. You could be watching, football Friday night. You could be watching a lot of stuff, but you're here. And I personally think it's important that we understand the history of every person in Licking County, all of our family members. It's a shame though. We don't learn a lot about them until they aren't here. This is my thought. But I think at some point in time, whether we do it, whether they're living or they're not here, we need to make that effort, to do it and make it happen. So thank you all. Dr. Burton, was an amazing person. I think he came to Newark because Newark needed him, and more importantly, he needed Newark too. This was a place where he could be as involved as he wanted, and he truly was involved in every aspect of his life. So thank you all, and I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Tom, you hit a chord about not asking the questions. And I could think of all the things that I would love to be able to ask my parents today that I never did. And the things I don't know and the things I'll never know. So thanks for saying that. That hit something. So thank you. Okay. Doug Stout's up again. And he's going to present Gertrude Dorsey Brown. Now, the thing I have to say is when we put the list of 10 together, we were concerned that it might be too much. But when the committee sat around and said, absolutely not, and when we were looking for presenters and couldn't find presenters, Doug said, oh, absolutely, I'm going to do it. And that's why Doug is presenting 4 today, because we wanted to make sure that they were presented today and to share the story. Doug, thank you.
This is an amazing woman, so there was no way I was going to let this opportunity not talk about Gertrude Dorsey.
That's what he said.
And if there's any family here, see me afterwards, because I've got some newspaper articles from the late 1800s I want to pass on to you. Gertrude Hayes Dorsey was born August 1st, 1876 in Coshocton. She was the daughter of Clement and Martha Dorsey. Her father was a barber. She went to school in Coshocton, and during her high school years, she was a sales representative and contributor to the Cleveland Gazette. Now, the Cleveland Gazette was the first owned African-American newspaper, having a circulation of about 5,000 readers. It was published every Saturday, and so she would just submit different articles to the paper, and most of it was just the comings and the goings, as newspapers used to be the Facebook of today. where you went, who you ate with, and what you were doing. That's what she submitted to it. So she would cover both Coshocton, and then she would cover Newark because she had family here in Newark. Her brother-in-law was D.M. Guy. In high school, she was elected the president of the High School Literacy Society. And in 1896, she was graduated from Coshocton High School, the only African-American student in the class of 11. In 1897, she left Coshocton to take charge of a school in Sutton, West Virginia. By 1900, she's back in Newark. She's living with her sister and her brother-in-law, Daniel and Dora Guy, on Buckingham Street, where she's listed as a school teacher. By that time, she was a representative for the Colored American magazine, which was based in Boston. It was the first monthly publication in the United States that covered African American culture. It ran from May 1900 to November 1909 and had a peak circulation of 17,000. She started writing. Her story, The Equation, ran in the magazine under her name, Gertrude H. Dorsey, in 1902. But on June 24, 1903, she married Orlando Hayes Brown here in Newark at her sister Mildred's home on 263 10th Street. They had their reception downtown at the Warden Hotel. After that, they were moved to Pittsburgh. But by 1910, she and her husband were back in Newark. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about her writings. She wrote mostly short stories. Some of them you can find online, and some of them are in books that you have to interlibrary loan from the library. Get a plug-in for the library. The book is called Short Fiction by Black Women. You want to read it. She writes amazing. These are the stories I could find that she'd written, but there's not a complete list. She wrote one called Scrambled Eggs in 1905, one called The Better Looking in 1905, A Case of Measure for Measure in 1906, The Voice of the Rich Pudding, 1907, one called Blood Monies of La Pate, I don't know the year, and one, A Sketch from Newark, Ohio, that I don't know the year, that I would love to find that one. She was known as an author to add a bit of twist in her stories, and she addressed social issues for blacks. They are wonderful stories, and I want to tell you just about a couple of them. In her 1906 story, A Case of Measure for Measure, Agnes Hine, who is a wealthy white woman, asked her black maid, Ora Marshall, to help her blacken her face to attend, as she put it, a little colored ball with her white friends in Savannah. She explained to Ora she didn't want her face smeared with a black cork or anything, black and greasy. She said, I want to be pretty, light brown skin like you, and can't you think of anything we'll do? So as the story progresses, Ora discovers one of her servants has been making hair dye that will turn the skin brown if you weren't careful. So in preparation for the ball, Miss Agnes, she had slept with her hair plaited into many small braids, Gertrude wrote. The day before the ball, Ora helped her unplait her hair so it now looked kinky, and then applied the dye to her face. Miss Agnes was so pleased with the transformation that she gave permission to Ora to spend the rest of the day as she wished, and gave her a $5 bill. Ora leaves, and soon a carriage arrives to take Miss Agnes to the train station. Agnes rang for Ora and exclaimed, I want to be unnegroed. She laughingly explained to another servant, Nellie, but Gertrude wrote, her laugh died in a violent death when search was made over the house, but Ora Marshall could not be found. Oh heavens, what shall I do, she said, and the soap as water failed to erase the stain. So Miss Agnes was forced to make an early appearance in her disguise to her friends that were all quite amused. Ora returns, and they used lemon juice, which washed away the stain. So the next day for the ball, Agnes decided she'd share the secret to her and her friends, and they all applied the dye again. However, as the night progressed, they kept reapplying it, so that when the party was over, it wouldn't wash off even with lemon juice. The women were forced to ride in the segregated car on the train, and in the process learned firsthand some hard lessons about racism and class. In her 1905 story, Scrambled Eggs, she twisted again. She wrote a wealthy white family learned a secret in the years following the Civil War. In the beginning of the story, the white businessman Merritt Grayson states the quote, "One drop of African blood, in my estimation, is sufficient cause for ostracism. One drop, once a Negro, always a Negro. End quote. A few days later, he's shocked to learn that, unknown even to his wife, she was switched at birth with a white baby while her mother was a slave. So Merritt's world is turned upside down to learn his wife and children are part African American. He learns the error of his ways, but he divulges the family secret to his daughter Dora's suitor. The white suitor is in love with Dora and he doesn't care, and two are engaged. But at the wedding, someone stands up and discloses the secret, ruining the wedding, since it was against the law for a white and black to be married. The rest of the story is the family learning who their friends are in the South when they find out the truth. In an excerpt from the story, the daughter Dora shares this insight into her feelings of finding out that she is, and other family members are, part black. I think we all have been very silly to spend so much time weeping and mourning over the fact that we are of Negro extraction. Are we not as good as we were before we found this out? If not, it is our own fault. Have we changed in our love for one each other? Have our feet become larger or our lips thicker? Or have horns begun to grow on our heads? If we have endured insults and calamity, and it has been only for 3 or 4 weeks, think what it has been to those around us who have endured these things not 3 weeks only, but all their lives. We have ourselves heaped upon them some of the very burdens which now threaten to overcome us. If I am a Negro from this day forward, I mean it to be as persevering, just as ambitious, just as successful as the white Dora Grayson of a year ago. Those were some of the things that she wrote about. In her years in Newark, Gertrude was active in many church and civic organizations. She was a founding member of the Nimble Thimble Club, which was organized in 1908 as a sewing club. And in 1916, she became affiliated with the National Association of Colored Women's Club. She was a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in Newark in 1941. She was a member of the Colonel Charles Young Women's Relief Corps 354, a women's auxiliary of the local Grand Army of the Public Civil War Veterans Organization. Gertrude died on April 20th, 1963. She was 86 years old. She passed away in Arlington Nursing Home. She left behind her husband and her 3 children, Jesse, Marshall, and Guy. In 2022, Gertrude Dorsey Brown was remembered in a mural at the Licking County Library in downtown Newark, featuring prominent women from Licking County. She is buried here at Cedar Hill Cemetery. Her husband died in 1969 and is buried next to her. But if you take the driving tour of Cedar Hill after this program, you'll be astounded to see that there is no headstone for this pioneer in African American and women's literature. If anyone is interested in raising funds to purchase a headstone for her, please let me know. As a community, we should fix this omission and honor her and her family properly.
Thank you, Doug. I now have Melvin Royster is going to present George Croom Jr., but I have to say something first. You're not getting off the hook too easy, okay? This is always good. So, this gentleman standing in front of you is our own Licking County's Hall of Fame umpire, who was inducted into Cooperstown Hall of Fame in 2017. And he has the ring to prove it.
Thank you, Howard. And listen, this is year 33 as an official umpiring. And when Cooperstown called me in 2017, I cried for about 3 or 4 days. And on day 4, Michelle looked at me and said, "Will you stop crying?" And I looked at her and said, "You don't understand." Anyway, thank you so much for that introduction, Howard. Good evening, everyone. As Howard said, I'm here to present George Henry Croom. I've got 2 pictures of George. His early years when he was in the Navy. Thank you, Tom. His early years when he was in the Navy, and his years as deputy sheriff with the Licking County Sheriff's Office. And this is what a wonderful event this is in remembering and honoring our Licking County most notable African American residents, and I just want to commend the Licking County Historical Society for putting this event together. And I consider and count it a privilege to be a presenter, specifically George Croom. I call him Pops because that's how close I was to him and he to me. So in my notes here, I'll refer to him as Pops. George, AKA Pops, was most of us who were very close to him called him. We called him Pops. He was born on April 17th, 1938, to the late George H. Croom Sr. and Lagoon Gibson Harris. He passed away at Riverside Methodist Hospital on March 29th, 2020. Pops proudly served his country for 23 years in the Navy. In fact, during his high school years, he served as a reservist, wearing his uniform to school. His mother had to sign for him because he was too young to enlist in the service on his own. He served on 7 destroyer ships. George chose the Navy because his dad was in the Navy. He and his dad served on the same ship during the Operation Deep Freeze. But the United States military changed that and made it a law that relatives cannot serve on the same ship. His 3 sons, Dana, George, and Daryl, not in that order. Let's see, it was George, Daryl, Dana, right guys? That's it. They also served in the military. Pops also served during the Vietnam War. He always thought it was his responsibility as a citizen of this country to give back to the country, which is why he encouraged his 3 sons to join the military. His wife, Annie, who he married, they married August 19th, 1961. They did a lot of things together, including traveling. They were truly a loving couple. They were always seen together. I myself loved seeing Pops and Annie riding around in the community on his motorcycle. George was a retired Licking County Sergeant Sheriff. He started at the Licking County Sheriff's Office in November of 1973, retiring 16 years later. After retiring, he inquired about returning to serve as chaplain. Mr. Croom truly loved the Lord. He was a devoted member of Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church, where he served as an usher and was active with the men's prayer breakfast. Anytime he had an opportunity, he would speak of the goodness of the Lord, that a person should make and put the Lord number 1 in their life. On one of his vehicles, which was a gray Chevy, it might have been a Ford, but it was a big conversion van, he had a bumper sticker that read, "God is my pilot." I truly love Pops. I miss him so much. In every capacity he served, he considered it his calling. His legacy just shows how much he loved the Lord and he loved his work. Most people don't think of a deputy sheriff as anyone but a crime fighter who runs around, looks around looking for troublemakers. But George had an additional talent. He's known also as an artiste. Yep. He's a professional artist and illustrator. He graduated from the School of Art and Design in New York and the New York Common College. He also worked with Archie Studio Drawings, drawing comics for the Archie comic book in 1958. Some of his illustrations were used by the Pepsi Cola Company for their commercials. He was also an art teacher for Par Excellence School. All of his artwork is freelance drawing. Truly a gifted man. He had an interest in art while attending Lincoln Middle School. In 1973, Pops designed a Ford LTD, which he called the shaft car. Now, the reason why he called it the shaft car is because his co-workers, his deputies at the office at the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department called him Shaft. So he designed this LTD Ford, and later on I'll tell you what was all in this LTD Ford. Here's some comments that I got to share with you that George made in some interviews. During the Vietnam War, when they arrived at port in Virginia, some sailors were instructed to change into civilian clothes when leaving the ship because of the anti-war sentiment. When he was in the South during his service, he wasn't permitted in restaurants to eat with his white friends. This made some of his friends angry, but George's good nature. He told them it was okay, and he would eat his meal outside. Here's another one. He was on a bus in Virginia and sat down next to a little old white lady, as he called her. And he was instructed and told he had to go to the back of the bus. The driver stopped the bus in the middle of the street, came back and told him, "You got to go to the back." George said he didn't understand why he would have to move. He did stand up to move, but the white lady, who George was surprised was so strong, said she put her hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down in the seat and told the driver he wasn't moving. So the driver shrugged his shoulders and went back to driving the bus. When George got off the bus, he said some of his buddies asked him, "What are you trying to do, start some trouble?" Now this next one is my favorite. One time in Australia, he was with some white sailors and two other white local girls. The girls started asking him if it was true what the other white sailors had told him, that blacks have tails. George said he stopped right then and there and pulled his pants down and showed them that blacks don't have tails. Now that's my favorite. That's Pops. Unfortunately, George was apparently the first Lincoln County coronavirus death. And after passing away at the age of 82 on March in 2020, they were transferring his body. There was a motorcade of Franklin and Lincoln County Sheriff's deputies that transferred his body from Riverside Hospital back to Newark, riding by his home for the last time at 817 Crescent Drive, Heath, Ohio. George Croom's life, his legacy, was such an inspiration. I am truly grateful that we crossed paths. His military legacy is being passed down to his grandsons and one who is now a major. Pops was such a kind, soft, spoken, and loving man. He'd give the shirt off his back to anyone in need. He loved and cared about everyone. He had a deep concern and love for me and my family. He and my dad were close friends, and when my dad passed away March 9th, 1988, Pops was there to support and comfort me and told me, "You're my son now." This is such the life and legacy of George Henry Croom. God bless you all.
Thank you. And our final presenter tonight is Mr. Doug Stout, who will be presenting next time. We'll be presenting Fred Coleman.
Another one of our World War I veterans was Frederick K. Coleman. He was born in Newark on December 17, 1892 to Jeremiah and Annie Lizzie Coleman. He had 4 brothers and sisters. He grew up on North 4th Street and on Ash Street. On June 5th, 1917, Fred was 24 years old. His draft record says he was single and unemployed. He was living in Detroit when he registered for the draft for World War I. He was 6 feet 1 inch tall. And he reported on his draft card that his parents depended on him for support. But he entered the Army on November 15, 1917. For his home address, he used his parents here in Newark, 97 Brennan Street. He trained at Camp Sherman in Chillicothe, and like I mentioned before, how the Advocate had sent medals, they sent one to Frederick, and he wrote a letter home to the Advocate on February 20th, 1918. He wrote, "Editor of the Advocate, I received the service medal that the people of Newark and Licking County sent to me, and I appreciate it very much. And I hope to prove myself worthy of it. I have it on now and shall always wear it, even when I come back. I like the life of the soldier and I'm getting along fine. We have not drilled very much on account of the cold weather, but since the change we are kept busy and will be from now on at bayonet practicing. It was rumored that we are to be transferred to Camp Grant at Rockford, Illinois. So if it proves to be true and I'm sent across the sea and do not come back, which I think I shall, just tell the good people of Newark and Licking County that I died from a wound in my breast and not in the back. Wishing to remain yours respectfully, Private Fred K. Coleman." He was assigned to Company B of the 365th Infantry Regiment of 95th Division. And they left for France on June 10, 1918. When they got there, they were given to the French. They were nicknamed the Buffalo Soldiers. He was promoted to corporal on June 14, 1918. An Advocate article July 2nd mentions that he sent a card home to his parents that he arrived safely and was well and enjoying life. The 92nd was part of the Meuse-Argonne offensive against the Germans as they drove them back through France. The war ends on November 11, 1918. On December 26, 1918, a letter was published that he'd written home the day after the armistice. He mentioned he'd been in the Big Drive and that they were about to enter Metz when the surrender was announced. In February of 1919, he sailed home. He arrived in the U.S. on February 24, 1919, and was honorably discharged March 17th. On March 20th, he's home in Newark, and he was asked to deliver an address at the Trinity AME Church as it was filled to capacity. There's an Advocate article written about that. It wrote, "Fred Coleman, son of Mr. and Mrs. Jerry Coleman of Brennan Street, is home after nearly a year's service in the Army as a member of the famous Buffalo Division. Coleman was a member of Company B, 365th Infantry, and sailed for overseas on June 6. He was on the firing line in France much of the time and served as a runner or messenger from headquarters to the front line. The only wound he received was in having a part of the forefinger of the right hand shot away." I didn't think much of the way they said the only wound. That's enough. Coleman has many experiences to relate of Army life, fighting and hardships, and the many sights he witnessed on the front line. Coleman was in the firing line with his regiment ready to storm Metz when the word received the armistice had been signed. In 1920, he was still living on Brennan Street with his parents. At some point, he moves to Detroit, where on October 10, 1923, he married 28-year-old Catherine Perry. He was 30 years old. He was a fireman and she was a laundress. He had a 7-year-old son, Raymond, that he adopted. In 1930, they bought a home in Detroit. But on July 31st, 1933, he died in Detroit, Michigan at the age of 40, said from complications of gas poisoning in the war. He left his widow, Catherine Coleman, and his adopted son, and his body was returned here to Cedar Hill for burial.
Thank you, Doug. Can we please give a round of applause for these amazing people? And what an amazing story that you all shared with all of us. And the time and the effort and the talent that you put into presenting tonight. Cannot thank you enough from the bottom of my heart. part in the Licking County Historical Society. I want to say some very quick thank yous. Please indulge me. I want to thank Cedar Hill Cemetery and the staff. They have been working so hard, and Chance and her crew have done an absolutely amazing job preparing for us. I want to thank the mayor, Jeff, for coming out and opening remarks. Very much appreciated. I want to acknowledge the committee again. Again, we start this process in March, and we try to cross our T's and dot our I's, and to make sure that we can provide a wonderful program to the community, and to show a light of something that you would walk away with today, that you know something that you didn't know before. And that's our goal, is to learn the history of Licking County and the people that live in it. And that's our goal. And Chance, I want to thank you personally for helping me in coordinating this. And Doug, what you don't know about Doug is Doug helped us do most of the research. Other than what you guys dug and found about your families that you didn't know about until we had you present today, which is just awesome. You know, God knows. Absolutely. I'd like to close, and I'd like to have Mike come up, and we're going to have a closing prayer.
Again, I just think it would be appropriate one more time to just thank the organizers of this. Echoes from the past we have heard, spanning, give or take a few decades, 150 years of lives, of stories of men and women of color. Some of the stories have been heartbreaking, as well as stories of triumph. Each of them have sacrificed something significant, whether it was their dignity or whether serving in the military. Some of them lost their lives or limbs. But all of these stories of the people that we have presented all have something in common. They addressed their circumstances, and they did the best that they could to elevate the lives of not only themselves, but their families, their friends, and their community. And if we could be inspired by those same challenges, then I think today's efforts would have been worth it. And I have one simple closing prayer. May the good Lord, our Creator and Maker, inspire, challenge, sustain, motivate, as well as bless us with the spirit to rise beyond, to triumph in pain, to celebrate even in what appears to be defeat. And may we all leave this world a better place than when we found it. This is my sincere prayer in the name of my Lord and my Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.